Good morning. I'm Elton Robinson with your February 12th grain and oilseed update. I've talked to a few Mid-South farmers the last few days, and many have told me they are in the midst of field preparation for the 2016 season. Many of them went heavy into corn and soybeans when prices spiked, but now those prices have dropped precipitously, and producers aren't sure where prices might end up. Quite a few say they may be going back to cotton in a big way, simply because it appears to be less of a volatile market and prices are somewhat attractive. Producers aren't necessarily looking at crops that provide the best option for profit, rather at which ones provide the least risk of large loss. Cotton is a crop that many in the Mid-South feel comfortable growing. With prices kind of low, growers might really push yields on better soils set up for irrigation. USDA released its monthly crop reports yesterday, which were bearish for corn, wheat, and soybeans, and somewhat bullish for cotton and rice. Annual U.S. wheat exports were lowered 25 million bushels this month to 775 million bushels on increased international competition, especially from Canada. The export total is the lowest in 36 years. This also raised U.S. wheat ending stocks by 25 million bushels, which are now the largest in 6 years. World wheat production remains record high, and foreign trade was raised, and at the same time, world wheat consumption was lowered by 173 million bushels. Not surprisingly, global ending stocks were raised to a record 8.9 billion bushels. According to USDA's report on weekly exports, January 29th through February the 4th, wheat exports totaled 376,000 metric tons. That's up 64% from the previous week. Japan, Mexico, Taiwan, and Yemen were primary customers. Meanwhile, weekly corn exports of 528,000 metric tons were down 20% from the previous week. Mexico, Colombia, and Japan were primary destinations. For the entire marketing year, corn exports are projected 50 million bushels lower as larger South American corn supplies further increase competition for U.S. exports. There was a 25 million bushel increase in projected corn use for ethanol based on the strong pace of ethanol production in January. Corn ending stocks were raised by 35 million bushels. The projected price range for the corn season average farm price was narrowed 5 cents on both ends to $3.35 to $3.85 per bushel. And Brazilian corn production for 2015-16 was raised 98 million bushels based on higher first crop yields. Argentina's crop production was increased 55 million bushels on higher area. Weekly grain sorghum exports of 240,000 metric tons were up 45% from the previous week and 50% from the prior 4-week average, with China as the primary customer and Pakistan and Mexico taking smaller amounts. Weekly rice exports of 49,000 metric tons were up 24% from the previous week, with Colombia, Japan, Guatemala, Honduras, and Mexico as destinations. In its February 9th supply and demand report, USDA reduced global rice supplies for 2015 and 16 by 1 million tons on decreased production and lower beginning stocks. The largest production change is a 500,000 ton decline for Thailand on the lack of water available. World rice consumption for 2015-16 was lowered 600,000 tons, but remains at a record 483.7 million tons. The largest reduction is for Thailand, which was lowered 300,000 tons on a smaller crop. World ending stocks were lowered to 89.3 million tons, the smallest since 2007-2008. Weekly soybean exports of 1.3 million metric tons were down 16% from the previous week, but unchanged from the prior 4-week average. Primary destinations were China, Indonesia, Taiwan, Turkey, the Netherlands, Japan, and Egypt. Soybean meal exports of nearly 200,000 metric tons were down 10% from the previous week, with Thailand, Colombia, Mexico, Panama, and Cuba among customers. Soybean oil exports of 27,000 metric tons were up 23% from the previous week, with Egypt, Mexico, Jamaica, and Canada as customers. USDA's average soybean price range projection is unchanged at $8.05 to $9.55 per bushel. Soybean meal and oil price projections are also unchanged at $270 to $310 per short ton and 28.5 to 31.5 cents per pound, respectively. Soybean production in Argentina is projected up 55 million bushels to 2.3 billion bushels on higher yield projections. Beef exports of 11,000 metric tons were down 11% from the previous week, while pork exports of 16,300 metric tons were down 11% from the previous week. Well, that's it for this week's report. I'm Elton Robinson. See you next week.